Revolutionary Socialist youth organizing in the 1970s, the Red Tide, and the battle to free Gary Tyler. You may be wondering what the Red Tide is and who is Gary Tyler.
So the Red Tide was a revolutionary high school organization. It started in the high schools in Los Angeles in 1970. From there it spread to the San Francisco Bay Area, then to Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. And the Red Tide was more than just a student walkout or a student strike. Although we did strike, we did walk out, we did occupy buildings, and we did do teach-ins. But we were also self-conscious revolutionaries and anti-imperialists with the goal of overthrowing capitalism. And we built a cadre organization that lasted for 10 years. As for who was Gary Tyler, Gary, if you don't know him, is an incredible, warm, unique human being, a renowned textile artist and gifted quilter. In 1974, Gary was a sophomore in high school in Destrehan, Louisiana, when his school bus, filled with African-American students, was attacked by a racist white mob. During the attack, a 13-year-old white youth was killed. Gary, who was outspoken and stood up for his fellow students, was singled out, targeted, arrested, and charged with the murder of that youth. Through the use of coerced testimony, planted evidence, and judicial misconduct, Gary was wrongly convicted by an all-white jury. He was sentenced to death by electrocution at the age of 17 years old, which made him the youngest person on death row in the country at that time. His death penalty was eventually overturned, but nonetheless, Gary spent 41 years incarcerated in Angola's prison.
This is the spiel I'm supposed to give. At the Socialism Conference, we each play a key role in keeping each other safe. N95s and KN95 masks are required for all indoor activities. Audience must wear masks even when asking questions. Please wear your badge. It's good for security. We encourage discussion, learning, and debate. We foster a culture of respect for differing views. Be aware that this session is live streamed.
And folks, feel free to come on up front. There's some empty chairs, and you can sit around the wall. You can join us up by the platform if you need to. As a former Red Tider, this panel is near and dear to my heart. I've been arrested with our three panelists that are here in person. I was arrested with Arnita in front of her high school, Western High School, when you were 14 years old. A couple months later, Arnita, her two brothers, Kenneth and Michael, myself, and another 4 Red Tiders were arrested at Southwestern High School. Kyle and I were arrested together when we trashed a Nazi headquarters in the northwest side of Detroit. Although Kyle, instigated by Joel Geyer here. Although Kyle was handcuffed when the cops started brutalizing another Red Tider, Kyle leapt up to defend her, to help her, and he was pretty brutally beaten in that police station. Michael and I and another Red Tider named Steve were arrested at McKenzie High School for reporting on a student walkout. That trial hung over us for a year until we had a trial and Michael delivered the closing argument and we were finally acquitted. So we're going to start with our panelists and then we're going to go to Gary, who is remote from Los Angeles. So Michael, would you like to start?
Thanks, Larry. And as soon as I pull it up here, we do what I got to do. My name is Michael Letman. I was one of the founding member of the Red Tide in 1971 in Los Angeles, and then eventually became the national organizer and then the Detroit organizer for the Red Tide when we went there. And since that time, I've been a public defender, former president of UW Local 2325 in New York City, and currently with Labor for Palestine National Network as well. So, we have a very brief, each of us are going to be very brief because of the time frame. So, to give some context, first of all, thanks to Larry for Socialism, for hosting the panel, and to everyone who's here, and most especially to our guest of honor, Gary Tyler, who sits behind us here. Can you hear us? Today, in the time that we have, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how in 1976, high school revolutionaries of the Red Tide in Detroit and beyond, as Larry has outlined, fought to free Gary, a 17-year-old black political prisoner on Louisiana death row. And in the process, built a multiracial working class socialist youth organization. By way of background, the Red Tide was born in 1971 as a radical underground newspaper published at University High School near UCLA, in predominantly white middle-class West Los Angeles. And many of us had become politically active, even in elementary and junior high schools, during the 1960s. And above all, in that time, we looked to the Black Panther Party, who were classically clad in black berets and leather jackets, and most importantly, armed for self-defense. And we were caught up in the high water mark of the 1960s, especially in May 1970, that followed Nixon's invasion of Cambodia, in response to which anti-war student strikes shut down 1,000 colleges and universities across the United States. This is almost exactly 55 years ago last month. But, as you might expect, and would be no surprise in times like this, brutal state repression soon followed, including the murder of student protesters at Kent and Jackson State in May of 1970, the death of 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson in August 1970 while trying to free his brother, renowned Soledad brother author George Jackson, and the subsequent jailing of Angela Davis on related murder charges, for which she was ultimately acquitted. The fatal shooting of LA Times reporter Ruben Salazar by LA County sheriffs during the Chicano moratorium in August 1970, the assassination of George Jackson in August 1971, and the bloody suppression of the Attica uprising in September 1971. And in all of this, above all, the target was the Panthers, who under relentless government attack, and also disconnected from a stable working class base, soon split between a paramilitary guerrilla faction led by elders and Kathleen Cleaver, to which the Red Tide was initially attracted, and a reformist wing led by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. So in the late summer of 1971, inspired by widespread high school and other underground media of the era, and identifying ourselves as Marxists, and as Larry pointed out, as revolutionary communists, as we called ourselves, we launched the Red Tide newspaper, which ranged in style from dead serious to the satire of the yippies and underground comics. It projected a mixture of anti-racism, sexual liberation, anti-imperialism, and student rights. And in the first 4 years, the Red Tide published some 20 issues, expanded to other high schools, and became increasingly multiracial. During the resurgence of anti-Vietnam War protests in the spring of 1972, which would be the last major anti-war moment of that war, the Red Tide became the high school wing of the radical movement in LA and the movement's voice in the high schools. And in the process, we began to work with the International Socialists, which argued that the Vietnam War could only be ended by organizing the power of rank-and-file workers and the oppressed to take action to actually shut it down. And our relationship with the IS deepened amid the 1973 American Indian Movement occupation of Wounded Knee, during which Red Tiders were part of an AIM relief caravan seized by the FBI. And this Wounded Knee solidarity work also included the Socialist Collective, which was a predominantly black Marxist formation in South Central LA with whom the Red Tide was increasingly close. And so, to say something, but also a way of explanation, founded as a national organization in 1969, the IS emphasized the self-emancipation of the working class, as exemplified by Lenin, Trotsky, and the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917. The IS was both anti-capitalist and anti-Stalinist, and resolutely opposed imperialism from both of these camps. It opposed all forms of oppression of people of color, women, and the queer community, a position that stood out from much of the left at that time. It argued that there was no parliamentary road to socialism, as proven very shortly by the bloody US-sponsored military coup against Chile's left-wing Allende government on September 11, 1973, the real September 11th that we should always remember. And it centered rank-and-file worker revolt as practiced by the Trade Union Educational League in the 1920s and the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement and League of Revolutionary Black Workers in Detroit during the late 60s and early 70s, where the IS established its national headquarters, and it argued that a Leninist party based on internal democracy was indispensable for the working class to seize power. Did I get that right, Joel?
Got all of it.
Okay. Joel Dyer here was the national chair of the IS and was instrumental in helping to form or support the Red Tide as the IS youth group, which I'll describe in a moment. So in 1973, IS members introduced us to another high school-based revolutionary teen collective with its own history, going back to about the same time, 1971, and that was called the Contra Costa Socialist Coalition in the Bay Area, which included Larry Bradshaw, the moderator of today's panel, who can say more about their experience. And in December 1974, the Red Tide and the CCSC relaunched the Red Tide as the, quote, organizationally independent but politically subordinate IS youth group. And from the beginning, and with substantial political and financial support from the IS, our plan was to hothouse a multiracial socialist youth organization to complement the industry-based work of the IS in Detroit, which was the militant epicenter of the black working class, and in many ways still is, with the power to generate and carry out a socialist revolution in our view. And as a result, in 1975, the Bay Area Red Tide set up a predominantly black branch in Oakland, and in fall 1975, a small cadre of California Red Tiders began to move to Detroit, where we soon joined with the IS to defend school busing against racist violence. And by distributing the newspaper and campaigning against racial conflict in schools throughout the city, we began to recruit both black and white members, some with their own history of radical activism, as you'll hear in a few moments from Arnita Dobbins and Kyle Hopkins here. But the Red Tide's breakthrough moment in Detroit was its campaign to free Gary Tyler, which you've already heard Larry summarize and describe for you. And in fact, on May 1st, 1976, again, so that would be 49 years ago last month, or almost last month, 200 people rallied in downtown Grand Circus Park in Detroit, the first protest held anywhere on Gary's behalf. And that was followed by another rally on June 13th of 1976, which featured civil rights icon Rosa Parks, who at that time lived in Detroit, and we were honored to have her on our platform. And then in addition, building on that, the IS and the Red Tide launched a national Free Gary Tyler campaign, holding events in 10 different cities. As Gary will explain shortly, his sentence was soon commuted to life. We can't claim credit for that, but nonetheless, that's how it unfolded. But he was only released in April 2016, as Larry mentioned. Meanwhile, in response to the June 1976 massacre of students in Soweto, South Africa, we escalated anti-apartheid solidarity while the Red Tide became a predominantly black organization, with new branches, as Larry mentioned, in Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and elsewhere. However, these successes also placed very great demands on a very small group. And moreover, the IS remained the overwhelmingly white parent organization of what had become a predominantly black Red Tide. And without going into all the details, this began to have a ripple effect. And in March 1977, several Red Tiders, including myself, became founding members of the breakaway International Socialist organization we remained for just a short time. But nonetheless, and despite a lot of different discussion that could be had about all of these things, and although the Red Tide never grew beyond 50 to 75 members, even in its Midwest period, the Red Tide itself remained in the IS for several years, continued to publish the newspaper, and campaigned on a whole number of issues. And before finally a number of Red Tide members, the remaining Red Tide members disbanded essentially the Red Tide and dissolved into the ISO in 1981. I'll just stop by saying, or end by saying, that suffice it to say that through all these events, and with a critical mass of youth cadre and the support of the IS, a central anti-racist focus, however flawed we may have been, and the IS may have been in some ways, the Red Tide in its Midwest incarnation flourished for a few years as a truly multiracial, revolutionary socialist working class youth group. And from a half a century's distance, we hope that its experience, albeit described very briefly here, and also viewed through a critical lens, can provide some inspiration for new generations seeking to fight the power. And I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Before we move to Arnita, could we move maybe a chair by where Barbara is so that people coming in can come up front? There's a lot of room here. People don't have to be crowded back there. And if people come up.
Chair right there.
There's a chair here.
There's room on this side.
And there's room on the floor.
For International Socialist review, is it? Yeah. and was able to get the New York Times, in fact, to begin to write a series of columns about Gary's case that really ignited interest in that. There are a number of other people in the audience who deserve to be recognized. Just if you would, just raise your hands if you were involved in any way in the Red Tide, in supporting the Red Tide at that time. Okay, we've got Tanya English, Puerto Rican man here, both from the Detroit Red Tide. Who else? We're missing Molly from Cleveland Red Tide we've met, and we're missing anybody else. Yeah, and there's many people from the Red Tide who are watching as it's being live streamed. So now handing it over to Arnita.
Hello, everybody. As you said, my name is Arnita Dobbins. And I think I will, Michael covered a lot of things that I planned on talking about, of course. But, I just want to talk about my introduction to the Red Tide and to the Free Gary Tyler Committee. I was a freshman in high school in an ROTC class, actually. And on the desk, there were these flyers with a picture of Gary Tyler and his story. And I just still, even to this day, and I don't know how many years later, I was still so moved by this very young man who was on death row. And coming from my family, my parents fled. They were part of the migration out of the South, fled to Detroit for work, like millions of other black people did during the 40s, 50s, 60s for work. And that my family has always been really political, especially around black liberation and black politics. My sister was in Black Panthers. My mom and her sisters and her family participated in the boycotts in Birmingham and in Montgomery and Alabama. Uncles had been chased out of the South. So we were very much aware of a politic from black people's perspective in black liberation. My family eventually joined the Nation of Islam, partially because of the religion, but really moved by the nationalism and the political nature of the Nation of Islam at that time. So it was a natural movement for me to be involved in nature of the Nation of Islam at that time.
You're echoing. Go ahead.
Oh, I am. So I see this flyer, and I'm like, I have to do something. They were advertising this big rally that was happening on May 1st. So I called the phone number. You guys probably don't remember that, some of you. But anyway, I called the phone number on the flyer, and this really enthusiastic white woman answered the phone. Oh, yes, she was very excited that I was from this high school, because that's where the Red Tide was organizing. And I went to a rally and met Larry and Kyle and some other people from the Red Tide, and that just, that was it. That was the story. I think every person, mostly in Detroit, knew about Gary Tyler. So even now, as a 60-plus-year-old woman, when I go back to Detroit and I see my old friends or I run into people, they ask, how did it happen to that boy? And one thing that still saddens me is that even my family, they were all so moved, and my mom died a year before Gary was released from prison. But even, through her dementia and everything, and her lucid moments, whatever happened to that boy? So, even getting involved in the Free Gary Tyler Committee, I understood even then that it was just not about Gary Tyler. That racism, violence, the policing of black people and black bodies is just American as it is apple pie. So even in my high school, there were racial divides. I went to a very integrated high school in Detroit. Black, Chicanos, Puerto Ricans, Arabs, whites, everybody was there. And there were times that there would be tension. And there would be these race fights that would just break out. And that's the Red Tide, who was already doing Gary Tyler work in high school, responded to those racial divisions and came in and talked about uniting and how it wasn't about race, it was about class, and We just, it was, yeah, it was very effective, and we recruited a lot of students, and people were very moved by our message. As I started to do more work with issues with the red tide, Larry was doing also some union organizing. He was working as a janitor to make money. So we'd run around with him at night, Tanya and I, passing out flyers, trying to get other janitors to join the union. So all of our political work was always, we always held a bigger picture. Michael talked a little bit about the Nazi bookstores in Detroit. It was still busing. We were still just on the edge of busing in some of the violent rallies that had happened. So the Nazis decided to open a bookstore in Southwest Detroit where I was going to high school. The red tide showed up and showed out. We were in front of that bookstore every single day. We had those Nazis hemmed up in that bookstore. No, we did. I mean, we were out there all human. We got a couple of successful at closing them down, and there was a picture of me on the front of the Detroit News, painting out the Nazi symbol on top of the bookstore. So, yeah, and all of that still doing work around Gary Tyler, still bringing information to him. So that moved on to, then Reagan was starting to come to power. Nobody thought Reagan was going to be elected, right? This was all a response to the movement of the 60s and the 70s, right? Because the minute that people started to get freedom, any rights, immediately there's the fight to remove those. And so here comes Ronald Reagan. And in England, the English version of the IS at the time.
Also the IS.
Yeah, Socialist Worker was helping to organize Rock Against Racism. So the red tide members that were still active, we kind of picked that up and used that as a tool to fight against Reagan. And we held this huge, huge rally. We got a number of musicians together in the same park across from my high school, Clark Park. And we worked with all kind of groups, with the Arab groups in Detroit. We even did some work with the Anti-Defamation League, but that's another story. Doing work, it was just highly successful. And so we had our biggest rally, Rock Against Racism, the year that Reagan was nominated. And, we were having a good time, but here comes the white racists. We ended up in a big fight. Again, fight Nazis. We got rid of them. It was a shit show. I'm going to stop there. I was going to talk a little bit about just how Reagan and Reagan's politics bring us to today with Donald Trump. I remember the Iranian and the hostages, right? We were talking about all of these things. We were talking about Palestine. We were working on campaigns against South Africa. We, the red tide, just continued to fight and continue to pick up issues that were relevant. And, so when I look at what's happening right now in the world, we have something to say to young people because we've been there. So when I look at what's happening in Israel, you see the glass gas, because I saw this before in South Africa, right? Towards the end, Soweto happened, right? It just gets really, really brutal when they're up against the wall. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there for now. And I hope people have questions and fill in a lot of gaps. We were really, really busy. We were really passionate about changing this fucking world. And we knew that we were the ones who were going to do it. Did we? Whatever.
Hello, my name is Kyle Hopkins. Back in the 70s, everybody called me Hoppy, or Hop. In fact, we all had nicknames, Bushy, and we all had nicknames back then. And as Anita said, we were very busy. If you look on the walls, you'll see the Red Tide newspaper. That newspaper, not only did we create the news, because we were pretty much everything we reported was the things that we were doing in the street, but we actually laid the newspaper out. We had the light tables, and we had the machines to make the banners, the headlines, the typesetting, and we would use, what's it called, these little knives. You cut out exacto knives. You cut out your copy, and you paste them on this big old board, and we would take it to a printer. It would be up all night. It got to the point where doing the actual political work and then having time to lay out a newspaper, we were at first coming out once a month, correct? It got to the point where we had to do quarterly papers because we just didn't have time to do the paper every month. So we would do the spring edition, that type of thing. So I was the organizer of the Red Tide from 1976 to 1979 after Michael left. As you know, with political organizations, especially, I hate to say it, our socialist organizations continue to split and split and split over ideological situations. So just as I was joining the Red Tide in 1976, I didn't know that there was a split coming up. And that's where the birth of the ISO came from. So Michael left the organization, and for some reason he nominated me to be the organizer. And I guess he made a good choice because actually everyone voted for the I was born right here in Chicago at Cook County Hospital, where most of the inner city poor and working class women had their babies. My dad, he moved our family back to his hometown in Detroit when I was about 4 years old. So I was born here, but I grew up in Detroit. Now, growing up in Detroit in the 60s was a unique experience. As Arnita said, Detroit is a very political city. I believe that upbringing impacted my worldview. We lived on Dexter Avenue, and I lived in a storefront apartment above my aunt's restaurant. She owned Maddie's Soul Food and Barbecue Restaurant, the place to be. All the Motown stars just come through there. I was living there in 1967 during the riots. I speak about this, I chronicle this in the forthcoming book by Andrew Higgins, A Collective History of the International Socialist, that will be published by Haymarket Books. Now, those 3 nights of terror are forever etched in my mind. I can still hear the gunshots. I can smell the smoke as the city burnt outside my windows. As they were burning these stores and looting, the apartments above them was, I mean, if you lived in a storefront apartment above a storefront, if it got burnt out, you got burnt out too. Detroit was a very political city. Politics was always debated in my house. Everything from Ali's anti-draft stance to Bobby Seale being gagged and chained in the U.S. courtroom, me and my father would just go back and forth about these things. You see, we even debated, I won't say argued, about the election that was coming up. There was this conservative, liberal, Coleman Young was about to run for mayor. But there was a radical, Kenny Cockrell, who was part of the League of Revolutionary Workers. Thank you. So I was really young, but Kenny Cockrell, that was my boy. Coleman Young. So my mother, she was with Kenny. My father, he was a conservative ex-Marine. Now, if you know anything about Marines, there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. Myself, I was more militant than Michael Evans on Good Times. So if y'all knew about the militant midget, oh, I was way more militant than that.
You're too young for that, you know.
Some of these people were around back then. So after the 67 riot, most of the whites moved out of Detroit. So the only white people I would see were people of authority, the teachers, and of course the police. That was until I entered high school. I was voluntarily bused to Frank Cody High School in a white neighborhood. And by the time I have entered into high school, I had already read the autobiography of Malcolm X, Seize the Time, the writings of Huey Newton, To Die for the People, Revolutionary Suicide, and those type of, the Chairman Mao's book. Ali and Huey were my heroes. I wanted to join the Black Panthers, but by now, the Black Panthers was defunct. Now my best friends and I, Tony Harden, Billy Nash, we all went to Cody High School together. And Billy and Tony were as radical as I was. In fact, Billy had read pretty much every book I had read. And anything I hadn't read, he had a copy of. Anything he hadn't read, I had a copy of. So we traded books and we talked about socialism and building us an organization. We considered ourselves revolutionary socialists even then. We had a pretty good following of people at Cody, but we never really had a real organization. And then one day, in the spring of '76, a group of young people came to our school selling a newspaper. And this was the headline. They said, "Free Gary Tyler." I almost said it even did. "Free Gary Tyler." We saw that, and we saw that cover story, and I see this picture of Gary looking a lot like I looked when I went to school. I mean, except for our facial features, that could have been me, that I saw. The lead story says, "Save Gary's life." He had been convicted, like Larry said, by an all-white jury and scheduled to be executed. The Red Tide was holding a demonstration in a march downtown that Michael spoke about. When we saw this, we decided we had to be in this rally. This was an opportunity to be part of the movement. The 60s was gone. All the stuff that we had heard about wasn't there, but we felt a need that we had to do something also. So this was our chance not only to stand up against the system, but also to meet the Red Tide. Because the Panthers talked about socialism, and the first thing in my mind was to find out what is socialism. So we had done our research, and we was like, we considered ourselves socialists back then. You'll see pictures of the Red Tide. You'll see me carrying the banner down Woodward Avenue to Free Gary Tyler. I wasn't even a member of the Red Tide yet, but I had jumped in, grabbed the banner, and said, "Let's go." I went to my first Red Tide meeting, and I met Mike Parker. He's passed on now, and the members of the Red Tide. And when I met Mike Parker and realized this is the same Mike Parker who with Joel, y'all worked on the Peace and Freedom Party. Now remember, the Black Panthers was my heroes. I'm like, the IS, it's the same people who worked with who pretty much started the Peace and Freedom Party. This is the group for me. I know I'm joining this organization. So once I joined the Red Tide, I found out that they were using what's called transitional politics. They explained to us that the movement to free Gary Tyler, even if it was successful, we would only have Gary released from Angola prison, only to be entered the same prison of capitalism and imperialism that we all are trapped in. So we traveled around this country shouting, "Free Gary Tyler is you, and Gary Tyler is me." We had the same urgency that moved many of you to take to the streets in the last few years for Trayvon Martin, for George Floyd, for Mike Brown. The same passion that have you protesting against other nameless people who are being snatched off the streets by ICE, who are being snatched out of their homes, whose homes are being bombed away from them in Gaza. We also face the same fears of government oppression and retribution that runs rampant right now in this country. We learn how far this government is willing to go to shut you down for exercising your political right to make effect on the society that you live in. But we're confident that you will not be frozen by fear no more than we were. A lot of the things we did, they spoke about us being arrested. One member was in front of the high school selling a newspaper, and once he was handcuffed, one of the police officers bit him on his nose in front of all these students. So you know the next newspaper we came out with, that was on the headline. And so like hotcakes, because it was about their school. We were in our high schools. We were black and whites in our own schools. In my school, there was a big race, we won't call it riot, but there was every summer there would be skirmishes between the white parents and the white students would jump on us when we tried to get back home on the bus to go home. I heard wind and something was about to jump off. So just like Arnita, I called the Red Tide office. Back then, you actually remember phone numbers. I called the office, and within an hour, Michael, Larry, and other members were at the school with a flyer, Students Unite, to tell the students that the police would love to close. We had an open campus. They would love to have our campus closed down because it's too much racial tension, it's too much violence. Because we were black and white, we were able to walk up to groups of blacks who were ready to go jump on somebody. We were able to walk up to groups of whites who were ready to go jump on somebody. Because we were black and white. We walk up to them and explain the situation to them and how we need to unite the students of the United Students and work together. As a natural resort of opposing racism and imperialism, we embarked on anti-Nazi campaigns. We fought for the Soweto uprising. Once again, we saw high school students looking just like us who went out, and so we had to support them. Some people will tell you that the movement of the 60s, the civil rights movement, the black power movement, the anti-war movement is a thing of the past. Many dismiss the 70s as a non-era, as Gil Scott-Heron mentions in his poem, The New Deal. Some people think the 70s is just as an era of bell-bottoms, Afro sheen, soul train, but the Red Tide is here to remind you that there was an upsurge at UPS. There was a fight for the ERA, and Teamsters fought for a democratic union. Most of all, people like Joe Allen and others continued to fight for Gary Tyler's freedom until he was finally freed from prison. There was a red tide. It came flooding through the schools, leaving in this wake dissension and rebellion. We invite you all to come and meet up with us later this afternoon or after this panel if you want to hear more of the actual stories of things that we did and how it relates to the fight that you're fighting right now.
Thank you, Michael, Arnita, Kyle. We've talked a lot about Gary. Now let's hear from Gary. But I have been asked to read by your publicist, Gary, your bio, so give me 30 seconds. Gary Tyler is an artist and a spokesperson for justice. During his years in prison, Tyler galvanized a movement that grew to have national and international support, one of the precursors of today's abolition and Black Lives Matter movement. Upon his release, he became involved in the fight in the death penalty. Tyler was recently awarded the Right of Return Fellowship and the 2024 Freeze LA Impact Prize, which recognizes artists who use their talents to address social justice issues. He holds an honorary doctorate of fine arts from Mass Art, and Stitching Freedom is his first book, and we'll talk more about that later. Gary is represented by the Library Street Collective and Art Gallery in Detroit. Gary?
I sit back and I want y'all to know that I am captivated by the romanticism and it's hard to believe, in which case it's true that each and every one of you, not only sitting on the panel, but also sitting out there in the audience, who were able to put their lives on the line to free me and for the struggle to achieve for justice. Struggle is inevitable, but justice is a calling. And I want you all to know, despite the 4 decades that I spent in prison, your struggle and mine was not in vain. Remember that. Was not in vain. And that Earth's greatest treasure lies in human personality. And that service to humanity is the best work of life. And I want you to know that you all have played your part in doing what's right and standing up. But of course, I'm not here to talk about me because you all have done so well or speaking about your endeavors and what you have done to educate the public about my struggle. I am here thanks to, Michael and you all that invited me. It's an honor to talk about an issue that is profound, that is just, and that we always, we got to really pay close attention to. Is that what went wrong in this country? And what went wrong in this country was that on a grassroots level, many have failed to galvanize the working people. Many have failed to bring people of, you could say, poor people together because they felt that there would be others that are going to take up their cause and that they didn't have to do anything. Voting is very important, but you just don't vote carte blanche unless you're voting for something worthwhile and just. And one of the biggest problems I felt that with American voters, especially the working class voters, is that they do not vet the people that comes in their community and ask for their vote. Just because an individual speaks good don't necessarily mean that he's good for our community.
Yes.
And there's lack of accountability. And many people don't know that psychologically, people speak about gerrymandering, districting of voters, but politics have a way of gerrymandering people to where people become discouraged, where they don't want to vote because of what? Poor, bad misrepresentation. And they become discouraged, and they don't want to vote. But even though that is a bad decision, because right now, the only power that you have is to vote. When you get out and protest and demonstrate, people count numbers. When they see those numbers, they know one thing. Those are my voters, or those are the community voters. And if I'm running for office, I got to be able to win those votes over. And I feel, though, that in order to galvanize the community, you got to go back to grassroots struggle, grassroots campaign. And I'm setting this scenario up to everybody to let people know that we all play a part in what goes on in this country. We're all responsible for one another. We're not in a position to point fingers at each other because we feel that the individual that voted for this duck taco in office, that it is their fault. Some people are misinformed. Some people vote out of disillusionment, out of dissatisfaction, to send a message to those who have failed to represent them, who have failed to live up to their obligations. And despite their decisions, we got to be able to forgive in order to move forward in unison. And now that brings me to what they say, what went wrong. And I always share this with my audience when I get an opportunity. Say what went wrong. And I always say that this is a story about 4 people. Look at those in the audience. Those in the Because you can be either anybody, somebody, everybody, and nobody. And it goes like this. That was an important job to be done. And everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry because it was everybody's job. Listen to what I'm saying. Somebody got angry because it was everybody's job. But everybody thought that somebody would do it, but nobody asked anybody. It ended up that that particular job was done, and everybody blamed somebody. Actually, nobody asked anybody. Listen to what is being said, that we tend to take for granted that there will be others that will champion our cause, that we don't have to charge, we don't have to get involved. But when an individual act that way, we got to always join our community, and we got to educate those in our community. We got to remind them what's at stake. We got to do that. We got to always emphasize them and let them know the consequences of not voting and not organizing and not trying to make a change. That way there, when everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody, when they look at each other, they can say that every one of us does something to effectuate a change to make sure that we all benefit due to what? Our effort in unison together. So I wanted to share that with you all because it's very important. Because I want you to know, each and every one of you, out of 4 people, you all played a very important role in me being here today. So your struggle and the effort that you made, the free me, was not in vain. Keep that in mind. Thank you.
That was pretty great. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, you guys. Wow. So now we're going to move to questions and answers. The way this is going to work is that you raise your hand and we'll take a stack. We'll call on you often. Oh, okay. So no, I'm not going to. 2 minutes, however. This went a little bit faster, so maybe there's a little leeway. We're going to tap on the microphone.
We have no microphone. We'll tap on the
You
table.
got to rewrite the notes. So we'll let you know when you've got 30 seconds. We'll let you know at 1 minute, and then we'll let you know at 30 seconds. We're going to call on 3 or 4 people at a time and ask you to line up. There's no microphone.
They just stand up.
Okay, you go.
Thank you. A couple quick announcements before we move into discussion. So, as we mentioned, Gary has a book coming out in October from Simon & Schuster called Stitching Freedom, A True Story of Injustice, Defiance, and Hope in Angola Prison. You can pre-order a copy by using the QR code on this poster. So please, get Gary's book. There will be,
There's no QR code, as it turns out, on the poster. However, we do it. The book can be ordered from bookshop.org. To pre-order and see reviews from Michelle Alexander, Reverend Barber, and Dave Zirin.
and for folks in
Sometimes I've been organizing for about a year at this point, and I get some people who are interested. A lot of people who lack any kind of formal education in the subject and are just interested. But as the year went on, fewer and fewer people showed up. Interest dwindled out and people stopped talking. It feels like people don't care anymore about their fellow humans, about their position in our current system, and they think, it's like they don't even think about it at all. Did you feel that way at any point? And if you did, how did you combat that?
In the black shirt.
My name is Miles. I'm from Seattle. I do organizing with the Seattle Student Union back in Seattle.
Can you speak up a little bit?
I do organizing with the Seattle Student Union. We fight for mental health counselors and fighting against police coming back into schools. I was wondering what type of political education you guys did, and what type of stuff you guys read, and if you did that type of stuff together. And also the whole story is really inspiring, and I thank you guys for doing this talk.
My name is Sean. I'm a member of Workers' Voice and a middle school teacher. So interested in, I guess 2 questions. Kind of related, not really related. One, sort of, what role, if any, did the educators in your school play in sort of supporting or assisting you or just generally giving you encouragement or anything like that, if any? But also second, I find the story of Gary Tyler and how the campaign around Gary Tyler mobilized you all into becoming members of and eventually leaders of a revolutionary socialist organization, really intriguing. I think in this period there's been a move towards kind of denigrating having mass defense campaigns, public political defense campaigns of people. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the importance that Gary Tyler's defense campaign played in politicizing you or others further into becoming active, not just in that individual defense campaign, but the broader political movements that they were related to, and eventually the socialist movement, because I think that could be a really useful lesson for today.
Thank you. We'll take the 2 in the front here. Yeah, in the white shirt and in the brown shirt.
Hi, thank you so much. I just want to echo what's very inspiring. My name is Leica, also a member of Workers' Voice. Especially for Anita, you were talking about how your family was involved with Black nationalism, and you ended up joining a socialist movement. So I wanted to learn more about what you think about with Black nationalism and the need for multiracial socialist organization and tension, but also possibilities there.
My name is Mark Clemens. I'm with Chicago Torture Justice Center, also a juvenile lifer. Hats off to Brother Joe. Had not Joe rebirthed what happened to Brother Gary Tyler, guess what? There's a great possibility that a greater movement would never have been birthed. As what Gary had to go through, that is trauma. And it goes beyond the grain of trauma. And, I just think that it is so very important that we take our hats off to the people that were able to stand for Brother Gary Tyler. And I'm going to say this. Being myself someone that was incarcerated for 28 years, someone that was tortured inside of a police station, had not Joe wrote that story, I would not have been able to give my input. I wrote for him to be granted a parole in Louisiana, able to also mobilize prisoners in the state of Illinois to also follow suit and to send correspondences. I think Gary had been out approximately 30 days. I was able to meet Gary in Washington, D.C. And let me tell you, guess what? We must raise hell for how this country have mistreated us as a people.
We'll take about another 5 hands. Shirt, the black shirt, and then who else in the back? There's one more. Joe. Okay.
All right, thank you everybody. My name is Paulino. I'm a high school teacher in New Orleans, Louisiana, and a member of my union, UPNO, the Historic Union of New Orleans Educators. And I'm very interested in the stories that y'all have told of the challenges and tensions around multiracial communities in your schools, and how did you go about both de-escalating tensions among different communities, while also politicizing and building a revolutionary movement. Thanks.
My name's Steve Halpern. I'm a school bus driver. I live in Philadelphia, but I was raised in Newark, New Jersey. I was 14 years old when the rebellion in Newark erupted. Newark, Los Angeles, Detroit, the National Guard murdered 180 people. This is documented in Elizabeth Hinton's book, America on Fire. She gave a list at the end of her book, 70 pages long, of rebellions that happened over a 20-year period. And one thing she doesn't say, this did have an effect. People started to get jobs. Black people started to get jobs they never had before, educational opportunities that they never had. But there continues to be that persistence in racial discrimination. Why? The stock market just hit an all-time high. Well, how do they do that? They do that with an obsession by cutting costs, and that, to me, is the reason why you have such persistence in racist discrimination. And that the only way to get around that is with a change in the system. And this is how we talk, and I'll just finish. The question was raised, how do we get over those who don't think anything can change? Read Frederick Douglass, Ida Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, W.E.B. Du Bois. They experienced much more difficult situations than we did. And they managed to make a mark, make a difference. That's all.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Sophie, and I just wanted to ask, how did you guys decide on what tactics you were going to use in your activism and which felt like most effective? And just kind of echoing what another questioner asked, like, how were you able to sustain like a years-long movement without burnout and stuff? And yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Hi, thank you so much. Your talk is very inspiring. My name is Cara. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. And kind of echoing what Palmer said, really interested in how you built the multiracial organizing, and also kind of your internal structuring, how you like brought people in, and especially like interfacing with those, with the International Socialist, kind of as a youth movement, interfacing with workers. Kind of how did you facilitate that kind of coalition and work together? Thank you.
Great. I think that was it.
Joe. No, Joe.
Joe.
Oh.
Well, thanks for the kind words, everybody. I just want to say that,
Lavender.
I just want to say thanks to everybody for the kind words, but the truth is I would have never known about the story unless it was for the veterans of the Red Tide who kept it alive. And a few of us at the time who were kind of revisiting some of the older cases of political repression and persecution and incarceration that seem to have fallen off the map in terms of ongoing organizing. Gary's was one of those cases. The most famous was Leonard Peltier, who was finally given some kind of clemency. But as Gary can, it's nice to meet you, Gary, via Zoom, is that Gary can talk far more extensively than I ever could about what a hellhole Angola prison was and where it incarcerated also a generation of black revolutionaries. I mean, for just endless decades. And it's just the American gulag. I mean, we think of Trump creating this gulag of immigrant detention centers. That's existed for a long time. But then there's the other gulag of imprisoning black revolutionaries and black working class people. That goes back many, many decades. So this is building upon a kind of incarcerated state. The other reason I became interested in Gary's case is because I grew up outside of Boston in the 1970s when I was a teenager. And you saw the most despicable and cowardly displays of racism directed primarily, but not exclusively, at black youth who were trying to integrate into the public school system. It was horrifying. And Boston is kind of remembered in that way. But in fact, every major city in the United States saw that. People should keep in mind that after the Brown versus Board of School desegregation decision came down in 1955, only one school district voluntarily desegregated their schools, Berkeley. Every place else fought it, and that encouraged the worst bigotry in our society. And there were political prisoners who came out of all of those fights. The most famous was the Wilmington 10. There's Gary's case. And that is an episode that we should not forget about, that we should remember, we should learn from, and it's great that Gary's out, and I'll see you in LA sometime today.
Wow. Well, basically there was a lot of questions, I'm going to tell you. And of course, time is of the essence. But I do would like to say this, is that struggle is never ending, and that is important that when we make the decision of fighting for someone, that is important that we educate, that we interconnect other instances that take place within this country, because our struggle should never be an isolated struggle. We should always show the systemic connection between each and every struggle that goes on in this country. Like during the time of busing. Busing affected every community in America. All right? And even today, it was so deplorable to say that a party that supposed to stand for equality and justice threw our young people under the bus when they took a righteous stand against what was happening over there, not only in Ukraine, but also in Palestine. That they labeled and sacrificed those young people as though those young people was anti-Semitic, and they were speaking about, that they were speaking against genocide, you understand, and they just idly sat back. And the Democratic Party want to know why they left, why they lost. It's because they offended the young people, and they offended the people of their party. People understand, young whites, the youth, and people of color are leaving the Democratic Party because they do not serve the interests of people in the community. White, black, and other, and other people Now, I don't consider, when they say minority, I never consider myself a minority. I'm a part of the majority of this world. Marginalized by those who are oppressing you, by those who are robbing you of your rights, and those that are getting richer because of what? They want it because of greed. You understand? And yes, we should never forget other plights of people that gone through. We should always highlight those cases as well. And that's when they get back to what I was saying, that what is going wrong, because we are now depending on a two-party system, and it should never be that way, because we're put in a position where we got to what? Pick the lesser of the two evils. Why is that? When they serve, you understand, when they serve in the same master, and they serve it to maintain the status quo that is, you understand, that we're dealing with today. So I just, generally, speak about that, but I mean, there's a lot that was said, and I feel that it's good that you're here, because it is everybody's job that's a part of this group to educate, to properly educate the people, and let people to know the system is designed to divide us, white and black, people of color. As long as they keep us divided, then that means that that maintain their control. We need to get to know each other, be able to appreciate one another, and that's how I learned. When I was in prison, I learned how to get along with whites in prison that was in prison themselves. And we found a commonality there. We bonded together. So when we went on hunger strikes, we went on worker strike, we looked at it that it was something that was going to benefit us all. Because when it came down with the goon squad, that goon squad didn't look at color, the goon squad looked at us as prisoners and that we had a place. They were determined to put us in our place. Unity and struggle brings us together. And I feel that that's something that we always remember. You understand that? Yeah, we got problems, but we can deal with those problems together by learning how to appreciate and work with one another and listening to each other. And that's what I mentioned about struggle. Struggle is a calling for those who know what's at hand and what they need to do to change things.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. And there's a lot
Well,
of...
I didn't mean to set the bar that high.
Yeah, but you did. And much appreciated for doing it, Gary.
Yes.
There's a lot of good questions there. I guess what I will try to do is just briefly address those questions as best I can by summarizing some points that I think are good takeaways in my feeling about the red tie experience. And so these are not exhaustive, just some things that I think help the discussion. One, high school students are the best radical activists.
That's right.
They're not the only radical activists, they can't be the only radical activists, but they are the best radical activists. And that's been shown in the civil rights movement, it's been shown in the 1968 blowouts in East LA, in, I think somebody's leaning on the okay. On high school activism in Black Lives Matter, and today in Palestine Solidarity, where you can see high school students walking out over that. And it was true in Soweto in 1976, as people here have mentioned, and so many other places. And yet, I think our movement, both back then and today, often fails to recognize and appreciate and understand the importance of that. So that's number one. Number two, young people, like everyone else, are not limited to relating to issues that are necessarily local or immediate or so-called bread and butter, although those are all important, but to national struggles like Gary Tyler's, to international issues like anti-apartheid and Southern Africa liberation was then, and Israeli genocide is in Gaza today. Three, if you're going to build a multiracial movement, and we have to have a multiracial movement for all the reasons Gary just said, none of us can get out of this alive on our own. We're going to, as they say, we're going to either hang together or we're going to hang separately. So nobody can make a revolution, in this world if we're divided. We have to, and to do that, there's many barriers that we have to overcome, many divisions, many chasms, many forms of oppression. And we have to champion the battles against all that oppression, and obviously one of those main oppressions is racism. So if we're going to build a multiracial movement, anti-racism is key. It has to be forefronted. And in order to build a multiracial youth organization, it's necessary to do that in campaigns like to free Gary Tyler, but also within the organization itself. And this gets to some of the questions I think that were raised, very good questions about how do you build a multiracial organization? And hopefully some other folks here can address that more fully. And the same goes for the parent organization, if you're talking about a youth organization. You can't have a divide in that way between the two, because youth organizations, and this is really point 4, youth organizations and parent organizations need each other. It's a symbiotic relationship. A socialist youth organization with substantial organizational autonomy, like the Red Tide have, is necessary to develop a self-confident cadre of young revolutionaries. We were very clear about that at the time. That's what we were very aware of that need. And the parent organization was very aware of that need. And that's why the parent organization gave us substantial, political and financial resources to making this happen. The Red Tide in its IS phase could not have been in Detroit, could not have campaigned for Gary Tyler if it was not for the material support above all from the IS. So that's necessary to have that youth organization, but at the same time, a youth organization needs the experience and the stability and the material resources of a healthy parent organization. You can't really have one without the other going forward. And if, to the extent you don't have both, you're not, certainly for a youth organization, it's not going to continue to exist forever on its own, and the Red Tide didn't, for a lot of different reasons. But one of the reasons was the parent organization was no longer able to play that role. And finally, no, I got 2 more points, sorry, if I could. One is number 5, revolutionary cadre is indispensable to building and sustaining any movement, but revolutionary activism must also be sustainable. And this comes up all the time, I know, in our political work today, and people are always, especially like in the wake of what's happened in Gaza, I mean, more than a year and a half of relentless, unbelievable genocide, or unfathomable anyway, not really unbelievable. And, a lot of people feel like, I just can't wake up to this every morning, and how do I keep, putting one foot in front of the other? And obviously we all have to face that challenge. But I think that the challenge also is to rise to critical moments like today's without burning out, at the same time without burning out the membership with exaggerated promises of imminent revolution or anything else like that. Can we do that again? Thanks. And that revolution is not, critical as revolutionary cadre is, revolutions do not depend entirely on just the willpower of that cadre, right? So it's trying to find the balance between all these things. And you're never going to be perfectly in balance because you've got to respond to things as they're happening. But you've also got to be aware of these issues. And finally, number 6, as Bob Marley's saying, don't give up the fight. No matter how daunting the political moment, and today's is, as daunting as you could imagine, nonetheless, capitalism, imperialism, injustice inevitably breeds resistance. And whether it's in U.S. against U.S.-Israeli genocide in Palestine, as Palestinians are showing us every single day since 1948 and before, in resisting the ongoing Nakba that continues to this very day, in worse form than it ever did, to the LA uprising now against the deportation kidnappings, we have seen that there is that resistance. And, from LA to Palestine, resistance is justified, and in that resistance there is hope for all of us. That's where the hope is. That there will always be that resistance, and in that resistance there is hope.
I could take a stab at a bite or 2 of this. One was about the role that educators played in terms of our political, what were they doing when we were going crazy in high school? So when I was in elementary, all of my teachers were very, very political, but they had come off the 60s and they were all the educators who were active in the 60s and 70s. So we would have deep political conversations. I remember one teacher stopping class to address the issue of colorism. She stopped the class and talked about it. And, that was pretty, to just talk about the politics and the history of white racism and where colorism comes from. And I think I was in 3rd or 4th grade then. So that was still, those were the people who were still, priming us. When I was in high school, at one point we walked out of high school. That's when the police were first starting to come in, and the police were going to arrest me. And most of the school came out. And I just remember a teacher coming up to the cops and saying, don't care. I don't know if they arrested me that day or not, but I remember the teacher, advocating, for me as her student. It seems to me that at least in California right now, the teachers and the teachers' unions are really active and really very political. So in Oakland, the teachers have been just going crazy right now, supporting the students walking out, and students are supporting the teachers and walking out. So that relationship seems to be a lot cleaner to me right now. I don't remember very much of them organizing next to us. And then I want to touch on the sister's question about nationalism. How did I go from a black nationalist family to an international socialist? It was with a lot of kicking and screaming from my family. Because there was so much that had happened in the Black Power movement that they were very much a part of. Some of my sisters, they were really deep in it and had been, really betrayed and surveyed. So there was really a lot of mistrust. And so we fought. I was getting down and trying to hold a political line with my family. And I think because I wasn't giving out, and I started, the one thing that I would say when organizing students is look at who's around you. If we just stop for a minute and look at the people who are sitting in the room with us, then these are the people who we have most in common with. So let's just talk about that. There's a whole lot of other things that are going in the world, but what do you have in common with the people that you're sitting next to? And I think I was able to do that in a way, and persistently, to move my family in some ways. In some ways I moved them, in other ways I was just totally rebellious and just became deeper and deeper into revolutionary socialist politics. But I also didn't have any judgment around the nationalism because it makes sense. It makes sense that you need to come together and hold, kind of keep the work that you're doing amongst the people who are also being affected by it. So I never felt critical of that. I think that's it for now. I want to say in terms of the red tide also, and the IS also understood that. So within the organization, we had a black caucus. We had a women's caucus. We had, even at that time, gay and lesbian caucuses, so that people could do that work that only they can do. Yeah.
And I was just going to add on that a lot of the questions seem about keeping the interest of the people that's in your organization, the tactics that we used. And one of the first things I want to say is, one of the reasons why young people and students are such good radicals and revolutionaries, they have less to lose. You don't have jobs, you don't have families that you have to take care of. We all got arrested so many times. You can't be missing your job because I was selling a newspaper. The IAS often, the red tide would be on the not only picket lines, but at the plant gates, passing out the flyers, newspapers, and so forth, because they would target the worker. You wind up getting red listed. So often, we didn't work in my father, he had his foot, you will not work in the plants. You grew up in the city in Detroit, your aspiration was not to become a factory worker. That was not what you were inspiring to. You might fell into that, but that was not your inspiration, where your goal. One of the things that kept interest was we were together every day. We became family to each other. It can become burnout but we would get up and go to the red tide office every day, looking for work, what to do. We're going to be passing out flyers today. We're going to be putting the newspaper together today. There was always some work to be done. Even if it wasn't in the street, there was work in the offices or making phone calls. We made contact lists. We were required, our newspaper cost 10 cents. So you can't support an organization on 10 cents a newspaper. But while we were selling the papers, there was a reason to engage with other students. We were required to get contacts. That means I need your phone number, a name and phone number. I guess now you guys get your IG and all of that. But we didn't have all the social media, but we got a phone number to call you so that we can follow up with you. We had parties. The Red Tide didn't just do political work. After that May 1st rally for Gary, that evening, after every political event we did, we had a party. We had a party. Molly knows. We partied. We got together, and at the party, it wasn't about just partying, not for the cadre. It was to meet the people who felt the need to come out, engage with them, talk to them, get to know them, keep in contact with them, so that when something else come along, they remember, oh yeah, hockey, yeah, hey, what you guys doing this week? Hey, we got a demonstration going on. How am I gonna get there? We'll pick you up at this time. One of our tactics was always being using salt and pepper teams. We almost always came as a unit like this. Our newspaper, the Red Tide newspaper, was key. It was a way for us to get our voice out, our opinion out when we couldn't physically be at places. I would leave. $5. I could spend $5. I could spend $1 and pay for 10 newspapers that I pass out. I would leave them in all my classrooms. Education. We, as cadre, we were required to research for each meeting a news story that was going on to bring back to the meeting. So each person during that meeting would have a topic that they would speak on about something that's going on in the news today, some political event, some book that we read, some article, some person from history, and we would teach, because again, we're high school students. Nobody really wanted to read books. It wasn't like, yeah, read Fannin, get W. Du Bois. No, that wasn't how it worked. We would read and we would educate. We would read and we would educate. My grandchildren live in Minnesota, and during the George Floyd demonstrations, they were hitting the street. And my daughter was so scared. She called, she was like, I don't want them going out there. I was like, no, they're young. They need to have their voices heard. But I explained to them how to be safe in the demonstration, because I've been in so many of them. How to recognize when instigators like this guy get you the... Quick story, I was following Joel, one of the reasons I got arrested one time, because he gets so passionate at this Nazi bookstore. When she painted out the windows at the Southwest bookstore, and that was not political, but a news story. All the big shots, politicians were out, and they took turns painting over the swastikas and so forth. The second bookstore, when we tried to do that, Larry went to paint out the signs. Oh no, they arrested him. So it became a riot instead of a political, a news story. It became a riot on the streets. But I told him, go out there, let these young people, my grandchildren, yeah, it's scary. And demonstrating and so forth is scary. But as Gary was saying, we don't want to be just demonstrating and pointing our fingers at what's wrong. We have to go beyond just pointing fingers at the system or at the problems. Put yourselves in positions where you can affect change. Like a person like a public defender, like a union representative, a union leader like Larry became. Michael became a public defender, like a Jasmine Crockett, like AOC. You get in positions where if we want to have elected officials who can actually do something. Because just pointing at Congress and so forth and saying, you guys are doing a bad job, we need people with consciousness who has a better idea. Back in our day, being a socialist was a label to be overcame. In this day and age, just because you're a socialist, that's not the bad word that it used to be back in the 70s. Being a socialist was dangerous. If you said people were afraid to sign petitions back in the 70s. Most of us used fake names because we didn't want to be realistic, we wanted to be pragmatic. But that's not the situation today. As impressive as it is today, you have to have the strength to stand up and fight back. But you have to have more than that. You have to have tools. You have to have a position to effect change. Just pointing out the problem, demonstrating and dissent, that's all good. Like Joe said, he wouldn't have known about Gary. A lot of people wouldn't have known about Gary. People wouldn't have known about Trayvon Martin. People wouldn't have known about Mike Brown. People not hit the street. But once you make it known, you have to go beyond just demonstrating. So you need to be in positions of power.
If I can just say one thing to the person in the back who talked about, feeling like students don't care. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like organizing right now with social media. I mean, it's such a weird thing, the social media. Like now I can be reading an article and I'm thinking it's going in one direction, and it's probably a bot that's actually leading me somewhere else. And if that's where most of the information is being exchanged, that must just add a whole different level to just keep people preoccupied. So it's, I think about my children, 11-year-olds, and how much time that their friends spend on social media. They're not even outside relating to one another. So but I've been watching them bring other kids just out of the house to play. And I'm just thinking that's how it just starts. It's just, you just keep trying to get people to relate to each other. Just having conversations.
Not busy enough to attend this.
All right. Pick up Gary's book and look out for